Okay, so I thought you made a lot of good points in your analysis of my paper, and in some cases, you point out that I was probably a little too vague, and I think that's probably true, and I appreciate that, and I'll be sure to fix that for the final draft. I really appreciated that you liked the references to Homeland that I included, because I wasn't so sure how well that would resonate, given that it's a TV series and not necessarily something that's nonfiction. But I thought it really reinforced my point about the drones, and I'm glad that that seemed to be something you thought went pretty well as well. Um, I'm glad that you liked the point that I was making about the terrorism, because I think that, you know, what the United States did is basically terrorism. I mean, they were just launching drone strikes, and they weren't necessarily getting a congressional vote or anything. They were just going about and doing it, which is essentially a form of terrorism. I mean, they didn't declare war on them or anything. They just started striking them. And I thought it was interesting how you pointed out that you were a supporter of President Obama, but you didn't necessarily agree with what he was doing either. And I think that that's probably true for a lot of his supporters, that they don't necessarily agree with what he's doing in terms of drone strikes. But I think you pointed this out, that I didn't necessarily seem to be laying as much blame at Obama's feet, because I don't know that it's necessarily Obama's fault that, I mean, he and his CIA program are the one doing it, but I don't know that it's necessarily his fault any more so than it would be if another president was in there, such as Trump even, because I don't think that it'll necessarily change, because I think, like I pointed out, they can keep the boots off the ground that way. So I think that it'll probably be something that, regardless of who's the U.S. president, they will deploy drone strikes, simply because, they don't have to put boots on the ground. It's easier to just strike and be done, in theory anyway. But as I pointed out, then that just gives us more enemies. But I think regardless of who the president is, they'll probably continue to use those practices until it's, they have to go to Congress and get their approval, and then it'll become much less prevalent because it won't be as easy to do. But I don't know that Congress is necessarily going to act, because, right now they can just kind of have a laissez-faire approach to it, and they can't be blamed in an election because of it, because, hey, the president's not asking them, so, you know, it's not like they voted on it and said, sure, let's go do it. But, yeah. And then I think another point that you made was that, um, that, sorry, um, was there, sorry, it was about the point that I was making about the blowback, and the statistic that I cited about, for every strike that our enemy list increased by, I think it was 60 people. I mean, that's just a humongous number, because, I mean, as a superpower, we have enemies, obviously, but to think that with every single strike we make, we're just getting more and more enemies and devastating more and more communities, I think that should give a lot of Americans pause, because I don't think that is something that Americans want. And I definitely don't think that Americans want the repercussions of those actions, which would be perpetual war, basically, in the Middle East, because the Middle Easterners are upset with us. I mean, they're responding with suicide bombings, invading our country, just making threats, hacking. I mean, it's going to be a never-ending cycle until something is done about it. And I mean, that was a point that I made, and I think it seemed to be something that you agreed with as well, that the American people are going to have to decide, hey, enough is enough, and require their leaders to be accountable. And I think that accountability is what's going to transform our diplomacy, as well as our interactions internationally with the Middle East, and not just the Middle East. I mean, any country that we're thinking, hey, let's launch a drone strike on them, because I mean, it could have been Vietnam, it could have been the Korean conflict. It didn't have to necessarily be the Middle East. that's just the point in our history where we're at, that we're at conflict with the Middle East. So, I mean, and I really liked your piece as well, the points you were making about the positive and negative piece, and I think that that is something that was a well-made point. Thank you.